Hello everyone, my name is Jake Phillips. I'm the head of ecosystem development here at Dogpatch Labs, and I'm really excited to be speaking with all of you today. What we'll be doing is sharing a little bit of an overview of the startup ecosystem here in Ireland. We'll be taking a look at some exclusive interviews with founders and ecosystem builders that are making it all go, and maybe look at where our ecosystem is headed and what can we do to make sure that we're achieving that success. For those of you who might not be familiar, here at Dogpatch, we're supporting multiple hundreds of startups, both in our own physical community, as well as with the InterTradeIreland, Ireland's national accelerator. We're really excited to be sharing some of the insights from some of these startups that you've heard from, and we'll be hearing about some of the programs that you see on here today. We were recently named one of the top 15 incubators around the world you need to know, but it didn't start that way. We began at a really humble beginning in an old furniture store here in the CHQ building, and over the last 7 years, we've really developed the ecosystem connections and the pathways that we're going to be speaking about today. And we believe that this neutral platform that we exist on is critical for our ecosystem. An important theme I'm going to be touching on today is about connectedness, not only between startups and funders, but between Dublin and the regions and Belfast, from the Republic to the north. And finally, our opportunity to not just connect with the wider European ecosystem, but our economic imperative to do so. So what we'll do is give you a sense of what's happening across Ireland, not only here, but also in the regions across the country, and really help you connect the dots. I think that's really what we want to focus on today, is helping you connect the dots of these different pieces. So if we look at our own startup ecosystem, I think an important distinction to make is that these evolve over a multi-decade basis. There's different interpretations from the startup genome to startup community, but what's important as we engage in this conversation is to understand where Ireland is on this journey. And we want to take a look at what's possible in the next decade, while also being able to measure what's achievable within the next year. Long-term mindsets are required to be an ecosystem builder, and anything less is simply not going to get the job done. So next, let's look at a framework that we might need to have this productive discussion around what are those key elements of our ecosystem. The truth is that startup ecosystems are complex. They're made up of many different people and organizations that are continuously acting and reacting with each other and the environment around them. And understanding these actors are critical to success. But what's the best framework for mapping an ecosystem? Because of this complexity, there's a lot of different models, from MIT to Babson to Omani, that people are trying to understand how to deconstruct the different elements of this ecosystem. And even if we look at our own ecosystem here in Ireland, the way that we did as part of our tender for the NDRC, working with Tech Ireland to map the ecosystem. And we focused a lot of time and energy to understand what are these elements. We've worked with leaders and hubs across the globe, as well as across Ireland, to really develop a working framework. And what we've come to is this wheel, with 12 segments that we believe are critical to understanding how we can develop and improve our own startup ecosystem. It's not perfect, but what we'll use this for is a framework for which to have this discussion today. So first, let's take a look at the startups, the core of this ecosystem. The most recent Tech Ireland report, there's currently more than 2,500 startups across the country being created all the time, from fintech to IoT to energy tech. There's an incredible range of companies being created all over Ireland. As we look at some of the different segments, we look at the top end of these ecosystems, some of the largest and most well-respected scale-ups in the ecosystem, certainly from Intercom now to Wayflyer and Flipdish, the most recent unicorns. These are the real gold standard for our companies, and we want to create more of these homegrown indigenous Irish startups that are scaling on to this $1 billion valuation and creating that next wave of entrepreneurs on the back of either going public or helping those entrepreneurs. Next, a few Series A companies that we're really excited about. Again, taking the looks at likes of Bobby Healy, Devin Hughes with Buy Me, Parsa at Alien, and certainly Allison Darcy at Wobot, recently raising a $90 million Series B. Some really exciting companies that we believe are well on their way to reaching that next wave of unicorn status. Again, some interesting seed startups that you might see more of in the next year or two. Certain David Collier from Clearword, where he's going to be sharing his experience shortly. You'll hear a short interview from him shortly on. Apis Protect down in Cork, really excited to see the work that's happening there as well. Next, the pre-seed startups, some of those really early kind of pre-seed companies that we think are going to have huge years this year in 2022. Now what I'd like to do is introduce a short conversation that we had with David Collier, founder of Clearword, about his experience in the ecosystem so far.
Meetings today, they're kind of disjointed and frustrating. You know, whether it's setting up a call with someone, trying to remember what was discussed on that call, or just trying to catch up with a meeting you've missed. You know, when you come back from holidays or when you have to go and you have to run for the afternoon. we find that experience of having meetings very frustrating and very confusing. So we decided, what if we could unify this experience to make remote, hybrid, and in office more inclusive and collaborative, ultimately leading to better meetings. Like, if I leave for the afternoon, I shouldn't have to ask you what that call was with that person, because then you basically waste twice. You waste your time twice. So what Clearword is a way to plan, schedule, and prepare for your meetings in a more collaborative manner, and have those meetings automatically summarized into searchable and shareable minutes. It's like, really, we closed the round in about 3.5 weeks, and it sounds like I have this talent for raising money in this case, and I don't want to sound diminutive to the people who have been raising for 9 months, because we've also been rejected. It's a normal process to be rejected by other VCs. Initially, we weren't raising at all, and because we were like, okay, we're going to bootstrap this, we're going to slowly grow, blah blah blah, and then through multiple various introductions, Connect Ventures reached out and we started talking. And it had been a while since I'd met a VC that is so founders led, so product led. And after one or two calls with Pietro, one of the founding partners of Connect, I thought, Jesus, I want to work with these guys. And so I interviewed a few of their portfolio companies. I talked to them to see if they actually were, and they really are. And since we started working with Connect, they are so product led. It's unbelievable. Then Act kind of came alongside as well, and I really liked Andrew. Andrew is our point man there. He's younger and more modern, and I think he brings another aspect which is also very interesting. He's very smart and well connected. During the crash, we figured, hey, let's start a business, which in hindsight was a good idea, but really rough. But yeah, there was really no support, and I don't think I played a vital role in growing the community. I think Eamon Leonard was probably a catalyst in bringing the community forward, and the likes of Intercom. Like, initially, I remember trying to raise money was something. You would raise like 25 grand for 40% of your company type of thing, and then throughout the years, it, like, I remember then we sold Ecolibre in 2010, I think, or so. And then Dogpatch came downstairs in the same building we were, which now we started kind of seeing an ecosystem starting to grow, even though it was still kind of government led. There was still a lot of, there was a bit of vibe growing. And since then, you've seen the startup weekends, the Dogpatch, the NDRCs, all the kind of programs that are coming together, and it has grown incredibly. I think having, the big major FANG kind of companies with loads of people in Dublin has been helping a lot. It feeds a lot of engineers. I think Intercom and Stripe together have been crucial parts of making people believe that it's possible.
It's fantastic to hear from David there. Next, let's take a look at some of the investors. It's certainly an important segment of the ecosystem that are allowing startups to access capital. If we look at last year, Ireland was 12th in the world in funding per capita. And there's been some really active Irish funders, but even more recently, we've seen more of the international investment community take an interest into Ireland and look at the companies that are here. And that's really exciting to see. If we look at just some of the big rounds in the last year, again, you've heard of the likes of Flipdish, Wayflyer, Let's Get Checked. I mentioned Wobot, but we have companies like Mainstay Medical, Perfuse, Exergen that are raising really big rounds relative to what you might have seen even 2 and 3 years ago. And that's a really exciting indicator and signal for us as the ecosystem continues to grow. Again, for those founders that are here in the audience, it's really important you can go and check the Irish Venture Capital Association's website. They put out quarterly reports to see who is actually writing checks. Who are the funds that are actively deploying capital in the ecosystem? So a little bit of a tip there for you. Just to spotlight a couple of the investors at different levels around Ireland that certainly we think are great examples and people that we work with closely within the community. By no means is this an all-exhaustive list, but we certainly love to support the different ecosystem actors that are really giving back to the ecosystem here. Next, policy is a really important area of our own ecosystem. It's going to help define and shape the ways that our startups can grow. And honestly, Brian Caulfield, the chair of Scale Ireland, says to have a world-class startup ecosystem, you have to have a world-class policy environment. If we look at our own policy gaps, so you look at things like share options for startups, investor relief, CGT for entrepreneurs, the relief around capital gains. Index Ventures actually, in a recent report, ranked us 13th in terms of startup friendliness and according to our policies. By contrast, we're probably number one in the world in terms of policies for FDIs and multinationals, and not doing so well, as you can see, for startups. So the role that Scale Ireland plays is incredibly impactful. So to do this, again, Scale Ireland was created to be this unified voice for startups in government conversations on behalf of startups to the government to really help engage around these critical issues that I mentioned earlier. Now you're going to hear from Martina Fitzgerald, who is the CEO of Scale Ireland, who's going to share a little bit more about their work and why this is so important.
Because the policies that the government enacts affects them in a very basic way, from their staffing, their operations, their employment law, to access to capital. It affects their operations in a crucial way. For instance, the legislation on R&D tax credits, many startups avail of that credit, and how they can avail of it, the criteria, the circumstances, their eligibility, that all comes down to the legislation and the framework that is put in place. So in a very basic way, the laws of this land affect every single founder in most ways. We recently surveyed founders and CEOs of startups, and 230 replied, and access to capital was identified as the main issue, especially for early stage startups. And we're delighted that the government has launched a new 90 million fund specifically geared at early stage startups. Second issue was staff, the retention and recruitment of staff. And this is so important because for startups to grow, to get investment, investors will look not only at the commitment and experience of the founder, but also of the team around it. So they are finding it really difficult to compete with bigger companies on salaries, and also to compete with other jurisdictions with more favorable conditions. And the third reason, which everyone will identify an issue, is red tape. Most of startups that respond to our survey have not availed of government scheme. They find it too cumbersome.
Again, fantastic to hear from Martina. We would absolutely encourage you to go engage with Martina and Brian and Scale Ireland. You can go to their webpage and find out more ways to engage. Data is another crucial part of any thriving ecosystem because we can't improve what we can't measure. If we look at the case study of Startup Nation, if we look at Israel, they've done an incredible job of tracking their ecosystem. They have an organization that is specifically designated to measuring, tracking, and putting out reports around that. And what that allows is different actors to enter into the ecosystem and understand where they can be most impactful. And Tech Ireland does that for us here in Ireland. They're helping map and track the different performance with a live database of companies, investors, hubs, and multinationals. They're putting out reports and funding reviews and different infographics and helping provide that snapshot of the Irish ecosystem on an ongoing basis. I'd highly encourage anyone here to go engage with John and Sri, go to the Tech Ireland webpage and register a profile, and check out any of the reports and see what's happening on the ground. Programs are another critical element of thriving ecosystems. And the good news is that Ireland is brimming with a lot of early stage programs that are great for not only the idea phase, things like Startup Weekend and the Validator Startup Boost program, but also that acceleration phase. As startups are looking to connect with customers, grow beyond the Irish ecosystem, and really understand how they can take on the world. Things like in the NDRC, New Frontiers, Google's Adopt a Startup program are all great examples of that working in practice. A few in particular I'd like to shout out. One is Patch, which is a youth accelerator over the summer run by Tom McCarthy. It's for ambitious 16 to 20-year-olds, and it was recently sponsored by Stripe, where they bring in some of the top entrepreneurs from Ireland. Again, the likes of the Collisons, Des Traynor from Intercom, to come speak with these ambitious young people who really want to create the next wave of entrepreneurship. So it's an incredible program. It's an 8-week program over the summer, and really excited to have that coming back for their third year this year. Next is First Fridays, which some of you may have seen in the news recently. It's recently been relaunched with partners across the country, as well as some additional multinationals that are coming in to support. The likes of Google, HubSpot, Microsoft, Salesforce are helping bring early stage supports for startups anywhere in the country. It used to be hosted just here in Dublin. Now we're going to be hosting it from all corners of the island. We'll be in Belfast later this year, so those of you in Northern Ireland, we'd absolutely encourage you to come join us while we're there. Any of you, rest of you, please come to us here in Dublin in March, or when we come to your city near you. Really excited to have that. That's an open day. Firstfridays.ie would be the best place to check out information there. Next, the NDRC. That's the National Digital Research Center, and this is the National Startup Accelerator Program for Ireland. It's really important that we talk about supporting startups across every step of their journey, from that early idea on maybe the back of a napkin, all the way through to getting that first check in the door, scaling internationally, and helping create that next wave of entrepreneurs. So NDRC does that. We have touch points all the way through, from office hours on a weekly basis, founder weekends to help you get that idea ready for a program, pre-accelerator, and then the accelerator where we're using a 100,000 safe investment note into these companies. Again, really critical for us to connect across the ecosystem. This is not something that is Dublin-centric. This is something we're tapping into ecosystems across the country. From Galway to Kerry down to Cork, we're connecting with those ecosystems and running programs locally in each of those areas. Excited to have the teams here join us. And what you'll hear from next is actually Mary Rogers, the CEO of the Portershed, who's going to share a little bit about why it's so important about this connectedness. And we'll be back afterwards.
Super important because that whole always on mantra from NDRC means that whether you're a startup in Dublin or Galway or Cork or Kerry or really anywhere in the country, there's a program for you regionally. And that's been huge because it's that equal access thing. Prior to this, startups in the west of Ireland had to travel to Dublin to access some of these supports, and now they're on their doorstep. And if they're not on our doorstep, they're on in Cork or Kerry or Dublin. And that's been a game changer. It's built their confidence because they feel like they're part of something bigger as opposed to being removed from it. So it means they can pop into the Portershed, have a conversation. They know there's office hours on the Friday, there's the master classes, so they're part of something bigger. And I think the supports from the mentors nationally and the entrepreneurs, the successful Pat Phelans of the world, whomever, that accessibility was foreign to them prior to this, and now they're part of this bigger group, and it's that whole leveling up piece. Yeah, it's that wider community piece. I think they feel more included.
Great. It's fantastic to hear from Mary. Again, we have over 154 portfolio companies that we've supported through the NDRC. And just to give you a snapshot of some of those numbers, those companies have gone on to raise significant capital. And we are very ambitious and hopeful about the next wave of those entrepreneurs coming through these programs. We're going to continue to raise that bar. Because our ambition is to become Europe's top accelerator. We're one of the first European accelerators to use the safe investment note. And that was really intentional as to why we did that. Everything we do is founder focused and entrepreneur first. So why do we use a SAFE? Well, again, our core guiding principles for every aspect of our accelerator is putting the founders first. We believe that by putting them at the center of every decision, that will not only attract the best founders in this country to join, but also the best founders from other areas to come to Ireland and build their businesses. And this applies to every aspect of our program design. So when our portfolio legal team applied the founder first principle to our decision on which instrument we should use, the SAFE was a natural fit. It meant that the founders are not going to be confused racking up unnecessary legal fees before joining. And we're proud to say that we're the first European accelerator to adopt it. And again, would like to acknowledge the open-mindedness and the forward-thinking mindset of the Department of Communications and Minister Eamon Ryan for allowing us to take this important step to be a pioneering accelerator within the European ecosystem. At a high level, it's a 100,000 safe note. It's an uncapped valuation with a 20% discount and a most favored nation side letter. So Kieran Gilsonen, our COO, is actually going to be sharing a little bit more about this here now. Here's Kieran.
What we saw over in Y Combinator was, back in 2013, they originated the SAFE, and it was a game changer really in the US. So when we saw some investors and entrepreneurs talking about SAFEs here, we really looked at that and said, you know, from global best practice, this is the right time to adopt the SAFE. So we did that and we modified it to suit Irish law, but we also discussed this with entrepreneurs, angel investors, investors to see, you know, is it the right time? We spoke to Enterprise Ireland as well, and they're seeing more SAFEs coming out too. It's the right thing for a founder because, number one, it's a very simple instrument to understand. There's only two real things they need to be negotiating on: the valuation cap and the discount. It's an 8-page document, legal fees are lower. And then for follow-on investments, it's very easy to manage the instruments and the investments you have, rather than worrying about interest rates, termination dates that you would typically have in the likes of a convertible loan note. At this stage now, we're looking to find the best entrepreneurs. And if we come out with an entrepreneur-first instrument, we're going to get the best ones in. I mean, it's very attractive for a founder when you have an uncapped safe, but it also works for us as the NDRC with our discount there. So at the next round, when there is a valuation or an equity financing round, we get the uplift.
That was Kieran. Now, next I want to share a little bit about hubs, because we believe that these hubs are catalysts in their own local startup ecosystems. They provide an early entry point for entrepreneurs to connect with the relevant supporters that they need, from funding to hiring, but it also acts as this neutral platform for different ecosystem actors to engage, from corporates to universities, governments to venture capital, and of course the startups that are bringing them all together. It allows them to come together and really find where are those collisions that maybe there could be something exciting that happens between them. There's a number of great hubs across Ireland. Again, groups like Connected Hubs are helping bringing the more than 200 actors from across the ecosystem together, and really importance of that connectedness. Again, as I talk about this throughout today, to create these networks, to share knowledge not only for ourselves as hub operators, but for startups. How can we create the pathways such that startups from Northern Ireland across the Republic can really accelerate and move even faster? How do we help take startups from that idea phase to the unicorn stage as quickly as possible? And that connectedness is really critical to this. So again, we thought of this, we saw this as something that was a critical need. Even 5 years ago, we started talking with the likes of John Bradford, who's the founder of Ormo Baths. He's actually the first investor into Dogpatch. He loaned our founder 10,000 euros early on when we needed it. And so it's really important, and we've created what's called the Irish Tech Hub Network. And that's a network of some of the leading hubs across Ireland to, again, really stress that importance of giving founders not only the ability to travel and work from different geographies, but to hire from there, to set up offices in each of these locations, and to really understand what are the local strengths that Galway has that we can leverage as a startup from Dublin who's coming there. What does Belfast do that someone from West Cork down in Skibbereen should be able to go up and leverage? What are the clusters of activity that we can help these startups tap into, in addition to funding, of course, anywhere that we can bring them in? So there's many pathways, as I said, that founders can take on their journey. Now you're going to hear from a founder that's recently navigated many of these early stage supports. This is Hannah Joyce, founder of Upskill, sharing her experience.
Hi, my name is Hannah Joyce. I'm the founder of Upskill Marketplace, and we help businesses reach their learning and development goals through connecting them with amazing trainers and coaches. But I definitely tie the success that we've had with Upskill Marketplace and the milestones we've achieved to the supports that we have access through the startup ecosystem with NDRC. After Founders Weekend, we really started to ramp up customer discovery and were able to land some customers, which we did not have before that. In the pre-accelerator, we were able to set milestones and achieve different levels of customer discovery. We also were able to practice our pitch in a way that we had never done before, and the showcase put us on the radar of some VCs. So absolutely, the leveling up that we have done has been tied to each of the programs that I have taken part in. I think the level of confidence that I have now compared to before going through this journey, just in terms of meeting people that I've never spoke to before, has been, it's just a completely different world. And I think that's part and parcel of the amount of different people that we meet. So you're repeating the action, which means that you're going to get more confident with it, but also it's the types of people that I have met and how welcoming everybody has been. It's honestly blown my mind how much people are willing to go above and beyond for other people that they don't know, just because we're all in the Irish startup ecosystem.
That was Hannah. It's really exciting to hear her story and hear where she's been. Now I would like to take a look outside of Ireland. If we want to take a look and see where can we go, I think Austin, Texas is an incredible example, not only my hometown, but also the fastest growing startup ecosystem in the US. And there's a lot of good people. You talk about Elon Musk, Joe Lonsdale, Jim Breyer, McKesson, Tesla, Charles Schwab, HP, Oracle, Apple. All of these companies and people are investing massively in and around Austin and within the Texas ecosystem. And there's a couple of key reasons of why that is. And we're going to be joined here now by Josh Baer. He's the founder of Capital Factory, Texas's largest startup community. And he's going to share a little bit about how he thinks about the success of Austin.
Hi, my name is Josh Baer, and I help people quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs in Austin, Texas at Capital Factory. And Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs in Texas. And Texas is the #1 state for startups in the US. And we have boots on the ground across the state in Austin, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. And we use all of our team to meet all the best entrepreneurs in Texas and help introduce them to the people they need to meet most: investors, customers, mentors, and employees to grow their team. And we've been doing this for more than a decade, and we've been the most active early stage investor in Texas over the past 10 years. I think the #1 driver, and this will probably be a theme that comes up over and over, it's talent and it's quality of life. And that's not something you can just fix overnight. It's not a startup problem or a tech problem, but it starts with, why do people want to live there? Why do people want to be part of your community? And that is one of the biggest things that Austin and Texas have going for them, is that it starts with that they're just one of the places where everybody wants to live, and talent drives so much else. I hear over and over again from people that have recently moved to Austin or come here over the past few years that they say is different than other places that they've been to, is really just the connectedness, the openness, the way that people in Austin welcome you and help connect you in. Instead of seeing you as a potential threat or competitor, they see you as a potential partner and someone that can help make the ecosystem better. And that really leads, to me, that sums up in this idea of a rising tide mentality, the saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's something so special that we have here that I hope we can keep as long as possible. But it's part of that feeling of like, I'm going to do better if other people do better. I want to help other people be successful here because that's going to help me too. For anybody trying to boost their own local startup ecosystem, I think you have to start by taking account of what are your strengths, what do you have going for you, and that's what you want to capitalize on. Every place is different, right? So you have to really focus on your strengths. And one of the big strengths of Texas and of Austin is that we have 5 of the 13 largest cities in the US, all within a day's drive of each other. So from Austin, I can drive to Dallas for the day, or Fort Worth for the day. I can drive to Houston for the day, or San Antonio for the day. And what that means is, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you can basically treat all of Texas like one big city. That means you can go recruit talent across the state. You can talk to investors in all those cities, and there's a lot of investors in Houston and Dallas. You can talk to the big corporate partners, because there's a lot of big Fortune 500 corporations headquartered in Houston and in Dallas and other places, and really just make it. And if you're launching something that you sell like geographically in different markets, you can have an office in one of these cities and serve all of these other markets from that one office. So it's really compelling as a launch city. And when you compare it in that way, everybody's in this kind of rat race of this city versus that city, or this state versus that state. But when you take it, it's kind of like not a fair fight when you make the whole city Texas, right? Because no city can compete with Texas. And Texas, if it were a country, it'd be the 9th largest economy in the world. It can compete with almost any other country in the world too. And so we've kind of like upped the game, right? And gone from competing at a city level to saying, hey, we're Texas. And if you're here, you have access to all of Texas. And that is the Texas Startup Manifesto. But the biggest takeaway, though, is that, and I'd say this is, I know this is to other startup communities out there trying to figure out what they should go do. And my biggest lesson, though, is you don't want to be someone else's startup community. Like, we don't want to be San Francisco. We don't want to try to be Silicon Valley. We'll never be a better Silicon Valley, just like we'll never be a better Hollywood. We need to be the best Austin we can be. And Austin's a little unique that it has a lot of, it's kind of like an all-star player. We have all kinds of different industries and all kinds of different things we can go do. Most cities have a little bit more focus. They've got, and so you got to figure out, like, what are your strengths? What are the things that you can really lean in on and leverage that are going to attract people, that are going to, that makes your city the most attractive place to be for that? And how do you capitalize that? How do you build that and use that to grow your startup ecosystem?
So that was Josh, and some of the key points he focused on there were around, again, connectedness, around bringing the 4 largest markets in Texas together to create Texas as one big city. What that means is that startups and investors can move between these different geographies easily, and the pathways that allow them to scale are really well defined. And I think, again, the critical piece there as well is that each of those ecosystems has a unique strength that they're bringing to the table and helping the others leverage, which really creates something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And if we look at that idea of this Texas startup megalopolis, of bringing those countries and those cities together, I think that Ireland has the same opportunity. The distances are even closer. From Belfast to Cork, from Galway to Dublin. I think if we look at the unique strengths that each of these have and really focus on the connectedness everywhere in this country, I think there's a real opportunity for startups to scale and to put Ireland on the map as one of the top 10 entrepreneurial nations anywhere in the world. So if we look at where we're headed, how we're performing, I think it's critical to place this within a wider European context, because right now Europe is really on fire. Last week, there was a report published on the state of European tech by Atomico. In it, John Collison talked about how 5 years ago, you could literally fit all of the continent's unicorns around a dining table. Today, you'd need an auditorium with more than 320 seats. And you'd hear a completely different story from them, from unicorns like Revolut, Lithium, Spotify, and N26, who are showing what's possible. What's interesting is that almost 100 of those 300 new unicorns were created in just the last 12 months. There's been a meteoric rise with more than $100 billion of capital invested to startups last year. That's 10 times more than 2015 and 3 times more than where we were even last year alone. It's been a record-breaking year for startups in Europe. And I think that faster rate of growth has been built on the groundwork of decades of hard work, of ecosystem development that's been done by those before us. It took us decades to reach 1 trillion euros of collective value and investment into European startups, but in the last 2 years alone, that's increased to more than 3 trillion. And Ireland just hasn't fully tapped into that European hypergrowth. It's lagging behind some of their counterparts, but there is absolutely the opportunity for us to make up this gap. Again, if we take a reality check and look at where we are ranked today, about 18th internationally as a country, Dublin being about 36th, there's ecosystems and cities that are smaller than we are, that are outperforming their larger counterparts. And I think if we can understand what those ecosystems are doing, using Austin as that example you heard from earlier, we can understand what it needs, what we need to close those gaps and compete at that international level. How are they doing? What do we need to do to get there and address those gaps of where we're underperforming? Because ultimately, we want to be a top 10 entrepreneurial nation. If we have this vision of moving up the rankings, what are the things that we need to do? The same way we looked at rankings for rugby or for foreign direct investment, we can be applying those concepts here to startups. And if we come back to that framework of the wheel we talked about earlier, what we need to do is be performing a 10 out of 10 in each of those categories. What are the gaps that we need to do, and how do we systematically close those gaps to allow us to move up? If we look at policy, for example, what are the things that we need to do across the CGT relief, from share options for companies, in order to help us be competitive, not only for talent, but for startups and investment anywhere in the world? And if we look at this as our ecosystem vision by 2030, it's really an incredible and exciting time for not only Irish startups and investors, but for European entrepreneurship and innovation. With so many countries making startups a real key part of their future economies, there's so many countries that Ireland can learn from in terms of our own economic policies moving forward. And the more that we can connect our ecosystems and provide clear support pathways for entrepreneurs, we can absolutely achieve this goal. So I really appreciate your time from here today. I want to leave you with just this one last thought before I go. It's from Bill Gates, and he says that we always overestimate the change that'll occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that'll occur in the next 10. And I think we're only at the start of this journey as an ecosystem. Everyone here has a role to play, from the founders to the investors, regardless of where you're located. And we'd highly encourage everyone here to get involved in some capacity. Again, thank you so much. My name was Jake Phillips, Head of Ecosystem Development here at Dogpatch Labs. Thank you for your time.